Raise your hand if you have student loan debt. Okay, if you're driving, don't raise your hand. But I know there are some listeners out there that have student loan debt hanging over their head. And it's kind of that feeling where you know they're there, you pay on them, but you try not to think of them beyond that because it depresses you. And you're like, I might be paying on these things forever. Well, I got news for you. You can save yourself tens of thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. That sounds awesome, right? Well, the way to do it is to not just set and forget your student loans, but to have an actual strategy in place, to think about your options. Federal loan forgiveness, taxable loan forgiveness, or public service loan forgiveness that's tax-free. There's refinancing. There's so many different options, and one of them is right for you. But you don't know which one if you're just kind of paying and not really thinking about what to do. So it's really important that you get a strategy to face these things head on. I think you should check out our options at studentloanplanner.com. Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations around money. I'm your host, Lauren, a 4-time Olympian and certified financial planner. On this show, my guests share their money stories. Everyone has a unique story and experiences both wins and losses when it comes to money. My intent is to give listeners something they can relate to, something that builds their courage to be open and take control of their own money story. When I'm not creating a great show for my listeners, I'm running my company, Worth Winning, where I help individuals and families organize their finances. Check us out at worth-winning.com. All right, now on with the show. Today, I'm excited to have Sheria Smith here to share her money memoir with us. Sheria is a civil rights attorney for the U.S. Department of Education. Her path to success took her from humble beginnings in Gary, Indiana, to a boarding school in Connecticut, and eventually Harvard and the University of Texas. This girl has a lot of incredible accomplishments, yet she's still super modest. Sheria is going to share with us what she did and didn't learn about money in a city that was stricken with poverty. She'll also share an interesting lesson she learned about the difference between old money and new money from her boarding school days, along with tips for how to recover from a financial mistake. Let's listen to Sheria share her money memoir with us. Sheria, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. I appreciate it.
Well, I just told everyone a little bit about you and what you're up to now, but every story has an introduction. So tell us a little bit about where it all got started for you.
Sure, yeah. I was born and raised in a city called Gary, Indiana, right outside of Chicago, home of Michael Jackson. Single mother home. We grew up with my grandmother. My world in Gary was pretty homogenous. If you haven't been there yet or heard about it, it's a primarily Black town, primarily working class. We lived below the poverty line, which is why we lived with my grandmother. And so finances were always a source of stress growing up. My one saving grace was academically was where I excelled. And so it was at school, I had gifts in school, and those gifts gave me opportunities to see other things. And so when I was 14 years old, I received a scholarship to attend a boarding school in Connecticut. And that school had a reputation of sending kids to the Ivy League, which is what the goal for me going was. And so I graduated there and then went on to Harvard University for college. After college, became a school teacher, which is going to be the start of that real story. So I moved to Texas on the border of Mexico and Texas to teach 5th grade. Did that for 2 years with a program called Teach for America, and then went on to law school at the University of Texas. And I've been practicing that law now in Dallas since 2010. So been licensed almost a decade, but it's my second career. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Well, you look not a day older than 10. So to be practicing law for 10 years already.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. So let's go back a little bit to like childhood life and talk a little bit more about this. Like you said, you were raised in a single parent home, and then your grandma was also a part of that household. Mm-hmm. And you said money wasn't really something that was talked about in a positive light, but was it talked about at all? Were there discussions about money?
The discussions about money were always around the lack of it. And I think that's part of the problem. We have people who we consider successful, but they never talked about how they got there. And frankly, looking back on it, they weren't as successful as I thought. It was all relative. Someone with a car or someone with cable but really high credit card debt, or people who were just only reliant on their salary. So you never knew what that meant. You couldn't really learn from people's mistakes or their successes. And credit was always thought of as something that you avoid. Now, we are Christian, and every so often some church would have some type of finance thing, and it was just assumed that you'd have bad credit or no credit. Or I'd see commercials growing up about buying cars, and it was like, no credit or bad credit, it's okay. Or people would just be living for their tax refund checks. But there was never a discussion of what money management meant and how credit could actually be helpful to you, not just in buying a car that you probably couldn't afford, but also how you could really make sure that you never had bad credit to begin with, instead of just a foregone conclusion that you would have bad credit, or that credit was something that you will misuse instead of a tool for you to kind of up your potential financially. So
thinking about, like you said, sounds like what you heard a lot of was about ways that people who were not managing their money well could just get themselves out of the hole. Wasn't a lot of conversations about how to take your finances to the next level or how to optimize them, how to create wealth. It was kind of assumed in the environment that you were in that everybody was in a poor situation. And so when resources were offered, they were only offered to help you dig yourself out of a hole that maybe not everybody was even in.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if people did have surplus, it was because they had got into an accident, got a cash settlement, or that's where the ambitions of athletes. You might have a child who could get signed by someone, either athletically or musically. We are the home of Michael Jackson. And that's how you become wealthy, for those kind of once in a lifetime type of opportunities, not so much something that you can have more agency in developing. And so that was just a lack of education. And even for people who we consider well off, what being well off looked like, what it spent like. So I grew up thinking once you're rich, money ain't a thing. So you're going to drive the finest, you're going to wear the finest, you're not going to shop for sales, which is what my life was. And unfortunately, I think that miseducation is still pretty pervasive in communities where it hurts the most. And so when I went to boarding school at the age of 14, I went there really for academic purposes because we were looking at schools who have a history of sending kids to the top universities. But what I did not anticipate was the lifestyle education it would provide. I was a rube, and I didn't know anyone who really had a whole bunch of money. So I did not realize who I was actually in school with until much later. And that worked out too, because then I was less intimidated. I could make friends. But what I realized is many of my classmates, I figured they were rich, but I didn't realize how rich they were. And some of my classmates, their families started Goldman Sachs, or some of the law firms that I ended up working for, or the Ford family attended my school. I knew them. My family worked in the steel mill, so I wasn't that much of a rube. But no matter how rich people were, they dressed shabbily. No one really talked about who was on their back. In fact, it was looked down upon. And I joke with some people, I was prepared to live in a school where I would be one of the few Black children there. And I actually prepared myself for not making friends or having friends based on that. I just thought that was going to be more of an issue than it ended up being. What I realized going in there is that the main difference was between what they called the nouveau riche and then the old money. And the nouveau riche were the people that I thought were rich. They were the ones who wore the finest or talked about money or how much money they had, kind of lived the life that you would hear rap artists espousing. And they were not highly regarded. And I would joke sometimes it was probably worse to be nouveau riche than it was to be Black at that school because it was considered tacky. And they talked about money in different ways, but they did not wear money. They did not drive their money. And I think it was more because they were more secure in their finances. I think some of that showiness comes out of an insecurity and you're feeling the need to prove your worth. But when you've been rich for generations,
it's just not a thing.
There are other things you have to prove, not to say that your life is perfect, but
right.
That type of ostentatiousness is beneath you.
Right. It sounds like it's one of those things where they always talk about in Europe, you don't have to have like a certain age to drink, or maybe it's 18, I think, but it's not as big a deal when there's wine at your table every night from a young age. And then there's no big, I turned 21, I got to drink myself to death sort of deal.
Yeah, let me binge. Yeah. Uh-huh.
This long money and money's always been around thing is like, okay, so this is just a thing and I govern myself accordingly. And so what do you feel like those influences around you, how did it manifest itself in your adult life now, like seeing that and being a part, and what did you take from it?
Yeah, it made me more comfortable being cost conscious. So though money wasn't a thing for them, they were not wasteful with their money. So they were going to ask how much things cost. They were going to compare prices. Some of them would brag about how little things cost them. Like, or I found this at the Salvation Army, or I'm wearing a blazer my dad wore. They're wearing hand-me-downs, but they were proud about it. And that's not what I anticipated really rich people doing. But it made me more confident that, okay, well, that's something we did just for survival, but I can be proud of that. In fact, because doing those things, being cost conscious for certain things allows you to be very generous philanthropically, allows you to provide for your children's education, it allows you to buy property and real estate. And it wasn't until I went home with some of my friends where, I didn't really know that there were people who had homes in multiple places. So I went to a friend's home for a long weekend, their home in Connecticut. But I was like, wait, I thought you were from New York. And they're like, oh, yeah, but we have a weekend home in Connecticut. And I was just like,
wait, what?
You don't stay in the same place all 7 days. Like, and it helped educate me on the types of careers that could provide that type of lifestyle. So very few of the people who went to my school, though growing up, I thought it was only going to be professional athletes or musicians who could afford this life. But that's what was my first time being introduced to people who did investment banking. I didn't know what that was. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't even know the different types of lawyers that there were. So I had friends whose parents were corporate lawyers. I did not know what that was until high school. I thought all lawyers were just chasing ambulances or going to be on the back of phone books or had an office in their home. And I learned soon the different lifestyle that allows. And it even helped shape how I picked my career.
Right.
Because I was exposed to what was possible. And no one really talked about it clearly. It was just kind of, you had to pick that up by osmosis. But you just ask questions like, oh, what do you do? How did you, develop it? Just as you're getting to know people and their families. And then you kind of learn what you can take and mold for your own situation. So that was the education, and probably the most, I think, vital education that my boarding school provided, was not being shamed about looking at cost, not being ashamed, or realizing that there's value in prioritizing what you spend your money on. And knowing that money doesn't always look like what I thought it looked like. It doesn't mean I have to spend $5,000 in a bag.
Right.
To show people that I'm worthy.
So it sounds like you have, like you said, a really humble background and a really good education into how to organize your finances, how to not live above your means, etc. Mm-hmm. But have you ever made any mistakes? Something that's come along? Everybody has some sort of financial failures. Have you had anything like that happened to you? And what was the lesson you learned in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've made plenty of financial mistakes. Probably not at that time in my life because I was on full scholarship. I didn't really have a lot of cost. But once I to law school and I was getting internships where my salary was going to be more than I had ever made before. Mm. And you get forgetful about the training that I think that poverty just teaches you. That's when I had my weekly spa appointments. And I did things because I couldn't have afforded to do them before. And not so much because they were important to my goals or to me. I mean, were important to what my goals for the future, but just because I wanted to do them. If I could go back in time, I would have done it differently. Although I did enjoy those experiences. I enjoyed the trips. I realize now, though, there were ways I could have taken the trips I took, like to Dubai or to Bali, a lot more cost effectively, but I didn't shop around. So I was like, oh, I can get this. And I was very proud about doing that. Also, I started taking care of bills for family members that I probably could have helped them in different ways. So that all happened. I can't think of one thing in particular, but certainly the type of discipline that I think real wealth requires, particularly when you don't come from it, it's very hard to be disciplined all the time. And I certainly have lapsed, just like with everything. Discipline, I'm not very disciplined in my eating all the time or in my savings. So yeah, that's left throughout my life. And those are things I know I need to kind of get back to.
It seems like a theme is discipline in your life.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who's recently made a money mistake, but is not sure what to do or how to start fixing whatever that mistake is?
Yeah, no mistake is final. That's the biggest advice. So just because you made a wrong step one time, the key is to learn from that misstep and hopefully not repeat it or try to mitigate the harm. When I was a teacher, I was always running out of money. We got paid once a month. It was my coworker, who was also my roommate, and he was able to stretch his salary a lot more than I was. And I was asking him, like, how is that possible? We get paid the same. Is your family really supplementing you that much where you're not overdrafting or whatever? And that is where he talked about his use of credit cards. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Like, you should never use credit cards because if you can't live within your means and so forth and so on. And he explained, and I had never, even though I had gone to Harvard, I graduated, that I was probably 23 at the time. He explained that no, he doesn't accrue interest or on his credit cards. He pays them off every month, but that helps him manage when things are coming out of his bank account. So he doesn't spend more than what he would actually be earning that month, but he uses his credit card to do all of his everyday expenses and then pays that off with the check that we got once a month in full. So he has no interest. And because it was like, an airline credit card, he got miles. That was how he was able to take trips based on the stuff he was spending anyway. Instead of using the very limited liquid cash, he was putting on a credit card. And that opened my eyes. I honestly think that it's unfortunate that it took so long in my life to even know that that was possible. It's not so much the credit card that is the problem. It is, well, one, not paying it off in full.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just thought you got a credit card, you pay the minimum payment. That does everyone a disservice. But I think if I had advice for people who make mistakes or missteps, I'm constantly learning and trying to improve myself. It really is to realize, not kick yourself too much about it, know that it's not final, but know to do better next time. So if you spend too much, for instance, I just recently gave a pledge to an organization that I really do care about that was probably more generous than I really should have done at this point in my life. I no longer work in private practice. I work for the federal government, but I kind of felt like I can give at this level and then I'll be recognized at this level. And I have it, and that's true, but I didn't need to give it all or make that pledge right then and there. And so going forward, I will be more strategic about how I give and more honest with myself about what I really can afford, or even knowing, even though I can't afford it, what I really should be giving at that particular time.
I think that's huge too, to have your heart in the right place and be in a position to be able to give, which is a lot of what people aspire to, is like, I want to be able to help others. I want to be able to give. But even then, to realize I kind of overstepped my boundary here in the giving category, I might have been trying to show off a little bit.
Absolutely, I was.
Let me reel it in a little bit, because something that intended for good can end up in a situation that'll put you, or not necessarily bad, but like you said, a misstep, if you will.
When I was younger, again, people who I thought had money, it was just like, I think they felt a lot more pressure to actually give to things without being strategic about whether or not they should at that particular moment, because people knew that they had more than the person asking. And so, okay, I have money. Of course, I'm going to help my family. Or, of course, they need their electricity bill paid. Okay, I'm just going to pay that. And for this particular organization, they were just like, if you give at this level, you'll have this recognition. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'll give at that level. Because I didn't want to say, no, I think I'll give at a lower level.
Do you feel like, because you're, like you said, Harvard graduate, Black female, like, do you feel extra pressure in that regard to rise above, or to, you said you're the one in your family that everyone says is so successful, et cetera. And so is that sometimes what you kind of succumb to?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I have to constantly work on myself to know that that doesn't define me, and to not come into that expectation of being the big baller of the family. And I've done a pretty good job of doing that, but sometimes I slip. I had a family member ask me for a couple of $1,000 to help with a situation they were having, and I had it, but I was able to then ask them, well, what is this going to be used for, and how can I prevent you from needing this significant amount of money in the future? Oh, well, I know they were very annoyed with me with those questions because I think people are just like, well, if you have it, just give me a check. but,
Girl, you over here preaching right now.
But I realized that wouldn't be very helpful for them. And it certainly wouldn't be helpful for me just to be giving thousands of dollars away that I could probably,
Exactly.
and I think it's sometimes important to have those conversations with your family, particularly if you are the first one to kind of enter into a certain income level. They don't necessarily know how much or how little that actually means. So if you're making more than anyone else in your family, but you're still not making what someone from Goldman Sachs is making.
Or even then, that perception is not always reality either. They just assume you're educated, you did better, give me some of your better.
Yeah.
And not willing to work to take themselves to the next level. Give me some of yours, and I'm not concerned about how it's going to affect you.
Right.
Just give me some now. And I think you bring up a really good point about the importance of having discussions. So someone comes to you and asks for money. It's like, well, what is this for? Well, you're asking for something out of my pocket. So
right.
I do have a right to ask you what it's for. And you can't just say, give me money and don't think that I'm going to ask for any other information about it. And if we really want our family and our friends and the people we care about to be in a good financial position, to understand why they're not in a good situation right now and why they feel like they need to come and ask and their back is against the wall in such a way that they need someone to bail them out, because you don't want to continue to bail people out and you want people to get on the right foot. So you're not trying to give them money to get even. If you want to give someone money, you want to give money to get ahead.
Yep.
And so is this going to help you get to school? What is the ROI on me investing in you right now? And frequently we come from environments where it's so short-sighted in the moment that they're not thinking about like, oh, this would be much better spent to get me a class versus keep my car that's too expensive in the first place from being repoed, right? Like maybe they need to repo that and you need to go get yourself a cheaper car.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I tried not to tell too much about I was like, how did you know?
There are some things that are epidemic in our culture.
Yeah. And I think part of it goes to people feeling like they need to validate themselves by material possessions. What people don't realize is the people who actually could afford those possessions sometimes don't. And realizing too that you have to learn how to validate yourself in other ways that are going to be more affirming and more helpful for you financially than feeling the need to buy something you can't really afford. But again, that's something I'm learning. Because like I said, though I'm fortunate where my needs are met, certainly in my giving, I need to really have a clear understanding of why I'm giving and make sure that my ego doesn't get in the way, that I'm giving at a level so I can be recognized instead of giving what I can give and in a manner that's going to be helpful. Because I don't necessarily need to go to a banquet or have my name in a program. And recognizing if there are different ways I can be of help. Like sometimes it's just not giving money. Sometimes I could probably be useful giving free legal services or something like that. I'm ministering to others, but I'm also ministering to myself. And
yes.
So then if I'm ever asking someone to give me a couple thousand because I just made this pledge.
Right, exactly. And it's true. You can end up with the shoe on the other foot. We're always just one financial mistake from catastrophe.
Right.
And that's anybody. There's no amount of wealth that's endless.
Yeah.
And sometimes people start to think that. And especially, like you said, there's very few people in the country that have the B in front of their name, that billionaire, where everybody else 100,000 there. Like that's not endless money.
Nope.
And we need to start thinking of it as something other than this is an unlimited amount of cash because it's more than I've ever seen.
Right.
And start thinking about what can I do? How is this going to help me with my future, et cetera. So with that said, how are you talking to the people around you, or how easy is it to have money discussions with your friends, your family members? And what kind of advice do you have about opening the lines of communications about money?
Again, this is kind of a work in progress. I think some of it, I've lived away from home for some time now, and the ease of those discussions kind of depends on the person and depends on their perception of you. Though I'm not dressed in the finest or whatever, I do have a nice home and they know that I'm able to help when needed. You know, I help with different tuition things. They do know that I travel extensively. So people do ask me how I do that. And I think when people are coming to you and asking you those types of questions, how did you do it instead of give me some of it, they'll tend to be the family members that are going to be a lot more receptive to your advice. One, because they're the ones seeking it. It's much easier to give that advice to someone who's seeking it than to tell someone something when really what you're telling them is not responsive to what they were asking you. And they're asking you just for the cash. So one of the things I've been doing with my mother, she's been one of the most receptive because I've been able to help her when she's needed things for her home and all that, and help her help my younger cousins. So one of the things we did together, I had a credit card that was allowing another authorized user, if you will. So she'd have her own credit card. She's still kind of learning how to use credit, but she does have a great home now with the mortgage that we were able to get together. And so, I mean, she does have much better credit than she ever did when I was a kid. And so what was nice about her being on my line of credit was I could see what she was spending and we could talk about how much she owed each month and just getting her in a habit of paying off her share of the bill every month. And it was so interesting when she first got the car, she would just pay me in piecemeal. You know, it's like, okay, I spent $100. But I was just like, Mom, just wait until the bill is due and then pay it all at once. And I told her, I was just like you would want, if someone in our family borrowed $20 from you, you would prefer that they just gave you the full $20 back. Instead of them saying, I'm going to get you $1 on Tuesday, I'm going to give you 10 on Thursday. I mean, it's just more stress for you to try to track what they have. We think that we can treat credit cards in a dissimilar manner than we would want to treat people in our real lives. Again, if someone borrows your shoes, they said they want it for a week, but they return it the next day early and the shoes look just the same or better than when you gave it to them. When they ask you for something else, you're more likely to give them that because they've established credit with you. Again, someone borrows $20 from you and they're like, I'll get it to you next paycheck in 2 weeks. And they're able to give it back to you that same week. Okay, this person's responsible. This person's good with my money. But if they borrow $20 from you and then you see them at the club making it rain, you see,
right.
And then 2 weeks goes by and you don't hear nothing from them. They haven't given you anything. They don't even return phone calls. And that's basically what credit is. And since my family did grow up, I mean, we are Christian. It's just like that is the Christian thing to do. You pay back your debts before they're due.
Right.
And if you do that consistently in your personal relationships and with your credit cards, you will see benefits. You'll be able to do more things than just what your bank account will allow you to do. So if you want to establish a business, but you're going to need a lot more capital to start it, you'll be better able to get those types of loans that you might need to really make your dreams come true from the bank because you have credit. Or even if you will get paid, but you're in a government shutdown, so we don't know when your paycheck's going to come, you can still do the things you need to do because you've established good credit. And people know that once you have it, you're going to pay it off probably even before they even need it or they ask for it. And that's just applying the relationships that we know person to person are valuable with your finances. They will lead to success. There are going to be times where if you're only making 30,000 or whatever, what you're making may not cut it. But if you have good credit, if you need to put in an initial investment to really make more or to do something more, people will invest in you because you have good credit with them. And banks are the same. So unfortunately, I don't think that we talk enough about it in schools. You can go to great schools and not learn these things until after you graduate. And it's not until you're around people who have been able to manage that successfully. And that's really a shame because the people who really need it, who would benefit the most from it perhaps, are still left out of that education. And so that's why I was really excited to hear about your podcast, because I think we need to talk about these types of things even more.
Yes, we most certainly do. And you have dropped all kinds of nuggets and wisdom on everyone today. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
We are now headed into what I like to call the final sprint. So I'm going to ask you kind of, there's semi-rapid fire questions, but are you ready?
Okay.
All right. You got $20 in your pocket. What do you spend it on?
I don't.
Ooh, I like it. Yes.
I put it in my savings account.
What's your advice for the government employees that are furloughed?
Man, gosh, pressure on the legislators. But as far as financial advice, call your financial institutions. If they haven't called you already, I know mine have. They know who my employer is. And it's because I've had to get credit before it's due that I don't have any late fees. Fortunately, I don't need late fees yet. I've been able to pay all my debts, but be proactive. So again, just with anyone, if you borrow $20 and you can't get it back when you say you're going to get it back, let them know as soon as you can. So be proactive. If you know something's coming up, you aren't going to be able to make it, let the creditors know and let them know why this is a big enough deal that they generally will work with you. If you're getting late fees, call them up and dispute those fees. It's amazing how quickly they can do that and how easy they can do that instead of you having to then pay or be behind because of some $20 or $35. So any fees you get, if you haven't proactively asked for a waiver, call and get those credited back to you. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
But first thing is get our Congress to work. We should not even be part of this conversation. We should be paid.
Yes. All right. Finish this sentence. That awkward financial moment when?
When the person who raised you asks you for money for purposes that you know aren't helpful. When you have to say no to someone that you love and respect.
Amen to that. That is an awkward financial moment. Something you do for fun that doesn't cost anything.
Sleep or run, actually. And that's why I got into running. I don't need a gym membership for it. You just need gym shoes. So that's what I do for fun. I sleep, but not as often as I would love to. That's sadly a fun activity for me. And back in the day, one of the things I did for fun, which is probably not fun for other people, but I watched The Price is Right. And then I compare the sales papers. I would be pretty good on The Price is Right if I ever got on it, because I kind of like to compare sales papers to make sure I'm getting the best deal. That's a nerdy thing I do. But
That's dope. Everybody's got something. All right. Final question. Can you share with us one thing that you would like to improve about your personal finances in the upcoming year?
My savings. There are a lot more things I can cut back on, and there are a lot of opportunities I could say no to. I need to be better about that. I also need to be better about the amount I spend eating out.
So what's the action item that's going to help you actually reach that goal?
I think sitting down and looking at my actual spending, I have an idea that it's more than I wanted it to be. But once I see it in black and white, that'll make things clear. And then setting out a plan, I'm pretty good. Once I have a plan, once I have a limit about sticking to it, I don't have that yet for myself, and I haven't taken the time to do that yet. And I've done it before. That's what I need to do this year to make sure that the extra money I'm spending on entertainment and going out, I could be saving that.
I love it. I love it. All right. You have made it through the final sprint. You are standing on the podium now. You are a worth listening gold medalist.
Oh, great.
So now it is your time to shine. Tell us how we can support you, where we can find you, anything you want the listeners to know so we can help you take yourself to the next level.
I don't know so much about myself, but certainly my colleagues in the federal government. So if you are inclined and you have your representative's phone number, just calling them and letting them know that, they should open the government back so people can get paychecks for the service that they're working at. We're not, I took a significant pay decrease to work in public service and for the government. So, it's not people are being greedy. They are, they actually like serving others, and they shouldn't have to do that at a sacrifice for taking care of their own selves. And so that's my only plug. I have nothing on the market, but this is kind of the main thing over my life is this government shutdown. So
yes.
That's the only thing I would ask.
Tweet the president and tell him get his life.
Yeah, open this government up and then handle the border security or whatever you call it later. I won't share my own personal thoughts on that, but paying people for the work they've done, it should be apolitical. It is unfortunate that there is a need now to put workers of all people as bargaining chips for something that has nothing to do with it.
Right. All right, Sheria, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Sheria's Money Memoir. She has worked hard to create a life different from the one she came from and has a real heart for wanting to help others as well. Our word of the day today, nouveau riche, or nouveau rich, however you choose to pronounce it. It also means new money. Sheria talked about how she could tell the difference between old money and new money. Old money acted like they didn't have it because they were comfortable with it being all around. New money, on the other hand, loved to flaunt and show off what they had. I think this is a good reminder that as you build wealth, to consider how you want to be portrayed. I'd say you want to look like old money. And that doesn't mean you look raggedy, but don't think that you have to be flashy to prove to others that you're making it. Those who are truly wealthy are not worried about impressing others. Thanks for tuning in today. We hope you found this episode worth listening to. And as always, if you have financial questions, suggestions for guests, or would like to share your own money memoir, please contact us through our website, worth-listening.com.